The streets had never shown him mercy. From the very first day, he opened his eyes to the world. Survival was the only language he understood. He grew up in a neighborhood where sirens were louder than lullabies, where young boys learned how to fight before they learned how to dream, and where danger sat comfortably at every corner like an old friend waiting patiently for another victim. As a child, Keanu had watched men disappear into prison and return colder than before. He had watched mothers cry themselves to sleep and fathers drown their frustrations in alcohol. The environment hardened him long before adulthood ever arrived. By the age of 13, he had already joined a vicious street gang led by feared young men who promised him protection, money, and respect. To a hungry boy who had never owned a proper pair of shoes, those promises sounded like salvation. And for years, he believed them. He robbed. He fought. He ran from the police. He became feared in places where fear itself had become currency. But one terrible night changed everything. A robbery operation went terribly wrong. Someone lost their life. Though Kwame had not pulled the trigger, he was arrested alongside the others. The court sentenced him to 10 years in prison. 10 years. 10 years behind concrete walls. 10 years waking up to metal doors slamming shut. 10 years of staring at ceilings while regret slowly ate through his soul. Inside prison, time moved differently. At first, Keanu remained angry at the world. He blamed poverty. He blamed society. He blamed everyone except himself. But prison has a cruel way of forcing a man to confront his own reflection. Slowly, the noise around him faded, and for the first time in his life, he began to think deeply about the choices he had made. He remembered his mother's tears the day he was sentenced. The night of Razor's robbery operation was the exact same night Kwame had been selected for his first major public cello performance, the concert that could finally launch him professionally. It was everything he had worked for, everything he had suffered for, everything that represented his new life. Now, he stood trapped between two worlds. One path led back into darkness. The other demanded courage he wasn't sure he possessed. On the evening of the concert, Keanu sat alone backstage, trembling. Sweat rolled down his face as memories of his violent past battled against the future standing before him. Then Maestro Solomon found him. The old blind man sat quietly beside him and spoke words that would change everything. "The past always returns," he said gently. "Not to own us, but to test whether we truly escaped it." Kwame's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in years, he understood something clearly. Redemption was not proven when life was easy. It was proven when darkness returned, and you still chose the light. With shaking hands, Kwame picked up his phone and secretly contacted the police. He gave them everything, the location, the plan, the names. Then he walked onto the concert stage. The auditorium fell silent. Bright lights illuminated him. The same man society once called a criminal now stood before hundreds of people holding a cello in his hands. Far away, Razor realized he had been betrayed. Enraged, he escaped before the police fully surrounded the area and sped toward the concert hall with murder in his heart. Meanwhile, Kwame began to play. The first note carried pain. The second carried regret. The third carried hope. And suddenly, the music became larger than him. Every hardship, every prison night, every scar, every prayer, it all poured through the cello. People in the audience sat frozen, overwhelmed by emotion. Some cried quietly without understanding why. Because true art does not merely entertain. It reveals the soul. As the performance reached its climax, police vehicles surrounded the concert venue outside. Razor arrived moments later armed and furious, but before he could enter, officers intercepted him. After a tense confrontation, he was finally arrested. Inside the hall, Kwame knew nothing. He continued playing until the final note faded into silence. Then came thunderous applause. For the first time in his life, people stood for him not out of fear, but out of admiration. That night, Kwame truly became free. Not because prison had released him years earlier, but because he finally defeated the prison inside his soul. Life does not always give people a clean beginning. Some are born into darkness. Some make terrible mistakes. Some carry scars that never fully disappear. But no past is stronger than a person determined to change. Your history may explain you, but it does not have to define you. There will always be moments when temptation returns. Moments when old habits whisper your name. Moments when fear tells you that change is impossible. But real strength is choosing what is right even when doing wrong feels easier. Kwame learned that redemption is not about pretending the past never happened. It is about refusing to let the past control your future. And sometimes, the greatest victory is not becoming rich or famous. It is simply becoming the kind of person your younger self never believed you could become. He remembered the fear in his little daughter's eyes during her only prison visit. He remembered how many people he had hurt while trying to survive. And somewhere inside that broken man, something began to change. By the time he completed his sentence, he no longer wanted the streets. He only wanted peace. When Kwame finally stepped out of prison after 10 long years, the world had moved on without him. Buildings had changed. Old friends had vanished. Some were dead. Others were still in prison. But freedom did not feel as beautiful as he imagined. Nobody trusted an ex-convict. Everywhere he went, doors closed before he could even explain himself. Employers looked at his criminal record and dismissed him immediately. People judged him before hearing his story. Still, he refused to return to crime. After weeks of searching, he finally got a small job as a janitor at an old music academy downtown. The pay was terrible, but to Kwame, it felt honorable. For the first time in years, he could look at his daughter without shame. Every morning, he cleaned hallways, swept rehearsal rooms, and emptied trash bins quietly while musicians practiced around him. And that was when he met Maestro Solomon. The old man was blind, yet somehow saw more deeply into people than anyone Kwame had ever met. He was a renowned cello instructor whose music carried emotions so powerful that even silence seemed to bow before it. One evening, as Kwame cleaned the rehearsal room, Solomon suddenly spoke. "You carry pain in your footsteps," the old man said calmly. Kwame froze. Nobody had ever spoken to him that way before. At first, he tried avoiding conversation, but Solomon kept drawing him in gently, patiently, like a father teaching a wounded child how to trust again. Over time, Kwame began helping the blind maestro after rehearsals. He guided him home, organized his sheet music, and listened to stories about music, discipline, and redemption. Then one evening, Solomon placed a cello in Kwame's trembling hands. "Play," he instructed softly. Kwame laughed nervously. "I don't know anything about music." "Neither does a child before learning how to speak," Solomon replied. And so began a journey that changed his life forever. Night after night, after everyone left the academy, the blind maestro taught Kwame how to play the cello. At first, the sounds were terrible, rough, broken, painful. But slowly, the instrument began responding to the emotions buried deep inside him. Every scar, every regret, every memory. The cello became his confession. Music gave him something the streets never could, healing. Months passed, then years. Kwame transformed completely. The angry gangster the streets once feared slowly disappeared, replaced by a disciplined, humble man dedicated to rebuilding his life. Even his daughter began smiling again. For the first time, hope returned to his home. Then one night, the past came knocking again. Kwame was closing from work when a familiar car stopped beside him. The driver stepped out slowly. It was Razor, his former gang brother. The same man who once protected him during gang wars. The same man he had trusted like family. But prison and crime had hardened Razor into something far darker. After a tense reunion, Razor explained why he had come. He was planning one final operation, a dangerous robbery that promised huge money. He wanted Keanu to join. Keanu refused immediately. He explained that his life had changed. He spoke about his daughter, his work, his music. But Razor only laughed bitterly. "You think society has forgiven you?" he mocked. "You think they'll ever accept you? Men like us don't change." Kwame stood firm. Then Razor's expression darkened. "If you don't come," he whispered coldly, "something terrible may happen to your daughter." The threat pierced straight into Keanu's soul. For days, fear consumed him. He barely slept. He stopped practicing. Even Solomon noticed the darkness growing inside him again. Then came the cruelest twist of fate.